Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Liz Bostwick and I'm a therapist in training at Redbird Therapy Centre in Toronto, Canada. This is episode 4 of the Redbird Therapy Self-Compassion series, Looking Inward. This series is a free online learning series all about self-compassion across 3 different platforms, right here on my YouTube channel, on my colleague Anne's Instagram page at Mental Health Wellness, and then a workshop we'll both be doing in the spring where you can bring all your questions about self-compassion. We'll be doing some self-compassion practices all together, and if you're interested in that, please register at the link in my description. We would love to see you there. Redbird Therapy has also partnered with PhysioPlus for PhysioPlus's back and sciatica pain workshop, which is taking place February 15th at 7 p.m. We all know the importance and the connection between mental health and physical health, and if you're having any issues with back pain, please join this workshop. It's free, it's online, there's a live Q&A with a physiotherapist and a chiropractor. If you're interested, there's a link in my description and you can follow that to register. So I just want to bring your attention also to jack.org. Jack.org is an amazing charity that looks at advocacy, the importance of education and accessible education around mental health for youth and young adults in Canada. So really check them out. They're really great resources. They're not a service provider, but check out their website. They have some really great stuff. So today, as I mentioned, is episode 4 of our self-compassion series. Today we're going to be looking at self-compassion for trauma. So we're going to be looking a little bit more in depth at trauma, looking at how self-compassion can help us heal and cope with trauma symptoms. And then we're also going to be doing an experiential exercise where we can try to practice and create some compassionate imagery in our minds. So we have kind of this safe place to go when we're feeling unsafe or not feeling secure in our space. And just before we get started, as always, I just want to remind you that this channel is for educational purposes only. It's not a substitute for individual therapy with a licensed psychotherapist. And especially when we're dealing with pretty destabilizing and really intense emotions that surround trauma, it's really important that we're processing and working through these emotions and these feelings and these symptoms with a trained trauma therapist, because we need that stability and that safety while we're doing this so we don't become destabilized. I do want to also say just a content warning that we will be talking kind of more generally about different trauma experiences. I'm not going to go in depth about any of them, but if at any time this episode is becoming too much for you, please skip it or pause it and come back to it when you're feeling a little bit more grounded. So with that, let's get started. So what are we talking about when we talk about trauma? Trauma is a really big subject, and we'll just take a little bit of time now to kind of conceptualize it and talk about it in some different categories so we can kind of wrap up our mind and see what we're kind of looking at here. So trauma can be defined as this experiencing of debilitating symptoms after a perceived life-threatening event or overwhelming situation. So trauma can be seen as the prolonged experience. After the traumatic event happens, these symptoms continue even though we're not in a life-threatening situation anymore. So people can experience trauma very differently, and people can be in the same situation and one of them can develop PTSD or really intense trauma symptoms while the other person doesn't. We definitely all have a different threshold for trauma and a different kind of experience around it. So it's really important to recognize that all traumatic events are stressful, but not all stressful events are traumatic. So it's really important to make that distinction in our head to see, what is trauma for me and what is not really my trauma. So to kind of conceptualize or categorize it a little further, we can look at big T trauma or little t trauma. So big T trauma is kind of trauma that most people would see as traumatic, or a situation that most people would consider traumatic, like a plane crash. And then little t trauma is more traumatic on a personal level. So a really intense breakup or a really traumatic experience of a relationship breaking apart. That would kind of be the little t trauma. And then another distinction is interpersonal trauma versus non-interpersonal trauma. So interpersonal trauma is trauma that comes out of an interaction with another person. So this could be assaults, it could be childhood neglect, and a lot of times this trauma creates a lot of self-blame and a lot of shame within us because we begin to blame ourselves for this trauma. Whereas non-interpersonal trauma, which could be like a natural disaster, there's really no blame put on one specific individual or no blame put on ourselves in these situations. So there are really a lot of different impacts that trauma has on us and a lot of different symptoms that come along with experiencing trauma. So I'm going to kind of look more specifically at psychological effects, intra or interpersonal effects, and then behavioral effects, just so we can have an idea of what the experience of trauma is like. So psychological impacts or effects, these would be anxiety, PTSD symptoms like disassociation, flashbacks, nightmares, depression, low affect, things like that. And then intra or interpersonal effects could be self-blame, shame, fear, and mistrust of others, and isolating from others as well. And then when we look at behavioral impacts, this would be fear or avoiding situations or environments where the trauma happened. So this would be like if you have been in a car crash and you kind of avoid driving or being in cars. So how can self-compassion help us to heal and cope with our experiences of trauma? So as mentioned before, self-blame and shame are some really common experiences that people can kind of go through after they experience interpersonal trauma. So it's interesting because people with high self-compassion are a lot less likely to blame themselves or blame their own character or blame their own behavior as the reason why they experienced the trauma. People with high self-compassion are also a lot less likely to use avoidance coping strategies. And these avoidance coping strategies, like using substances or really just avoiding the situation or avoiding the feelings, these usually exacerbate PTSD symptoms rather than actually making them go away. So we can see that self-compassion and building self-compassion can really help us to explore and send a lot of understanding to these parts of ourselves that blame ourselves or experience shame around the ongoing trauma experience and the reason why we experience this trauma in the first place. So self-compassion can also really assist us find safety when we are processing through those traumatic memories with a licensed psychotherapist. So it's a really good way of soothing ourselves, finding safety and stability within ourselves and sending love to those parts of ourselves while we're doing some really intense and hard work. We'll kind of talk a little bit about this when we do our compassionate imagery, but it's a really important thing to kind of have that self-compassion when you're working on these really intense and emotionally heavy feelings. So how does self-compassion target self-blame and shame in trauma? So we're going to be looking at the compassion-focused therapy model, which is developed by Paul Gilbert. So first of all, we as humans have this unique ability to self-reflect that other animals don't have. We can make meaning and make conclusions with the power of our frontal cortex and executive functioning. So after a traumatic event happens, our brain starts to try to make conclusions and make meaning out of the traumatic event. A lot of times, especially in interpersonal trauma, we kind of go into these states of thinking, this is my fault. The trauma happened. I'm blaming myself, my own character, my own behavior. That's a lot of times initially where our brain goes if we don't have a lot of self-compassion for ourselves. So this shame and self-blame can actually exacerbate symptoms, including us feeling like we're the threat and getting stuck in this loop where the threat response is constantly on and we can never really get out of that trauma. That's that feeling of the trauma being this prolonged experience. So our emotion regulation systems are really meant to protect us and to help us recover after a threat. So after a traumatic experience or during a traumatic experience, that initial trauma, we have a threat response, the fight, flight, or freeze. In a perfect scenario, we can then regulate this threat response with our parasympathetic nervous system or our soothing affiliate nervous system, which is the same thing, which is this rest and digest system that helps us to kind of regulate ourselves and come back into a calm state. However, in a lot of experiences of trauma, it's really hard for us to get back into this state. So it's either blocked or the soothing affiliate system is actually absent. So it's really difficult for us to get back to that soothing place where we can process the trauma and be okay. So in compassion-focused therapy, there's kind of this de-shaming process. So it's kind of a way of using self-compassion to move from this threat response back into this soothing affiliate response and not just have like a cognitive change and understand and make the meaning differently around the traumatic experience, but also it's a felt sense of safety and security that you can access and get to, so it's easier to process through trauma and to not get so stuck in that loop of the threat response. The self-compassion practice we're going to be doing today is a really important part of compassion-focused therapy. It is compassionate imagery. So in compassion imagery, we're going to look inward and try to create and find a really compassionate image that we can go back to and look inwards towards when we're feeling kind of trauma responses or any overwhelming or distressing emotion. So the purpose of this activity is to teach our nervous systems about finding safety and being able to activate that soothing affiliate response or that parasympathetic nervous system response. We really want to be able to find a safe place to land in moments of suffering and find a bit of relief by looking inwards. So it's important to note that sometimes activating this soothing response can actually activate our threat response because we're letting that guard down. So if this happens for you and you feel any threat response symptoms, like you're feeling agitated or anxious or anything during this, please pause the video, take some time away from it, or just focus on your breath. Or you can also kind of look for safety in your compassionate imagery instead of a soothing response. So kind of anytime I say soothing, just kind of replace that in your mind with feelings of safety. So to get started, everyone just make yourself comfortable. Find a comfortable seated position, or you can be lying down as well. It's all whatever's accessible and comfortable for you. So just get comfortable. Close your eyes or lower your eyelids. We're going to do something a little different, and I'll try to have a little bit of a half smile. So that might feel a little funny doing by yourself, but I really encourage you just to turn your lips up a little bit and have a little bit of a smile. So we're really going to be focusing on our breathing right now. So just focus on your inhales. Focus on your exhales. So just focus in on that slow, calming breath. So as you focus on your breath, I'm going to repeat some words. So these words are kind of ideas that you really want your compassionate image to represent. So while I'm saying these words, just begin to let images emerge in your mind. Wisdom, warmth, non-judgment, security, safety. So again, focusing on your breathing and just beginning to let these images emerge in your mind. If this is too difficult, give yourself some acceptance, give yourself some compassion. Don't try too hard. If you can't think of an image, just feel a color or anything. So we really want to try not to find a person, because this image is meant to be kind of idealized. So if you can only really think of a person, just try to think of the best person they can be, the best version of that person. So maybe you're thinking of an animal. A lot of people use their pets for this, or pets they used to have. It can be religious imagery, it can be nature, sunset, a tree, any object that you think really holds wisdom, warmth. And now focus in on that compassionate imagery. Recognize that it's yours. You created it. You can come back and change it whenever you need to. How do you feel spending time with this compassionate image? What do you notice as you're looking inward and focusing on that image? What is that image, that animal, that piece of nature? What do they want you to know? And as you start to bat your eyelids open and come back into this moment, feel the awareness around you. Expand what you notice around the room and really come back into yourself. And know that this compassionate image is in your mind. So you created it. It's always going to be there. It's always there if you need it. You can change it. You can add to it. It's just an image that you can hold on to and really picture when you need some extra compassion and you need an extra reminder of someone who can give you that compassion and help you find that safety. So as always, I'll leave you with 2 journal prompts. So the first journal prompt is, are there any parts of me that are holding on to shame or self-blame in relation to trauma I've experienced or distressing events? Journal prompt number 2 is, how can I use this compassionate imagery to help me regulate and find safety? Journaling is a really important way to integrate what we talked about today, self-reflect and debrief with yourself. So I really encourage you to try that out today. Thank you so much, everybody. That brings us to the end of episode 4. Please join me in 2 weeks on February 25th for my 5th episode, which is going to be self-compassion for body image issues and social comparison. So that's going to be a really good one, so make sure you check that out. I just want to remind everyone of my colleague Anne and her Instagram page at Mental Health Wellness. Be sure to check her out. And if you're interested in registering for the PhysioPlus workshop or our self-compassion workshop later on in the spring, please find both the register links in my description below, and we would love to see you there. Thank you so much again. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'm sending you all so much love and a lot of compassion too.